Welcome to Flow with Arman Assadi. Okay, guys, we need to talk. And what we are going to be talking today about is how to think, critical thinking skills. And in order to illustrate that example, we're going to use this topic of Trump censorship. And we're going to break all that down because first of all, what's happening with that topic specifically is that people are talking at and through each other on this issue. And this issue is a massive issue that contains many sub-issues. And until you can really sit down and learn how to critically think and organize those thoughts and make sure that when you're speaking to somebody or when you're thinking or when you're researching that you're looking at the appropriate placement of the idea within the overall idea, unless you're doing that, it's absolute chaos. So that's what we're going to do today. Quick announcement, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. Also, I am doubling down on YouTube. So if you're not watching the video right now on YouTube, go to YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're watching already, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be doubling down a lot. My team and I are going to be doing some really fun things with YouTube, creating clips and putting the full episodes up on YouTube. And yeah, just make sure, you're leaving a review and doing all the nice things. All right. So as well, I will say this is an episode that I would love for you to share with a friend or three. I think this is a very powerful concept that we're going to be walking through today. So send the link to this episode to a friend. So here's the deal. We're using the topic of Trump censorship to explore the framework of critical thinking, right? So this is complex, so you're going to have to, I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible, but stay with me. When we deal with complex topics that are emotionally charged, such as the President of the United States getting censored and banned permanently from social media platforms, we have to stop and think about the outcome of the conversation, what we are trying to ultimately unpack, what aspects of it are based in logic and rationality, and what aspects of it are based in emotions, ethics, and morality. So look, the outcome when looking at Trump censorship is this is a very complex topic with multiple issues within it that are often getting conflated or confused or mixed when discussing. So what I believe people are really trying to discuss here is the morality and the repercussions of banning versus not banning Donald Trump from social media, payment processors, his Shopify, everything. It's like a unilateral ban across the board when it comes to technology against Trump. I believe that really what's happening is a lot of people are attempting to talk about the morality, the right and wrong, but bringing up things like Twitter's rights, private companies, free speech laws, should the government have a say, intervention, free market, capitalism. All this shit is getting thrown around, but really we're trying to talk about one high-level issue and multiple smaller issues within that. Each one of these issues is critically important. So let's walk through Trump censorship. Issue number one, and so again, I'm using this to illustrate how to think about it, but I'm also helping us organize this complex topic so that you can actually go and think about this complex topic of Trump censorship and have discussions that are helpful and amicable and useful with your friends, with your colleagues, whoever it might be. So issue number one, I've broken this down into 5 issues, and I'm just going to walk through them. Issue number one is Twitter's right to ban Trump. Twitter's right. So the question is, should a privately owned, publicly traded company of this size, of this level of importance to the public, be able to restrict freedom of speech in a private space? The question to ask is Twitter a private space? Or is it more like a public square? And these are things that you can Google to learn more about. So the question is private space or public square? We have to make sure when looking at this issue to not be hypocritical or inconsistent, meaning if you're going to apply this standard to Twitter, you need to apply it to similar companies, perhaps even all companies. But the key is there are a lot of factors in play when looking at their right or not their right to do this. And really, when it comes down to it, we have the legal aspect of do they have the right? And we're separately going to look at the morality and repercussions of Twitter doing this. So that's separate. If you feel that Twitter did the right thing or did the wrong thing, that's separate from Twitter's right. So this is what we need to understand. Private companies do not always have the right to do whatever they like. For example, discrimination laws are in place. Private companies can say, people bring up the example of no shirt, no shoes, no service, or we don't like your kind here, get out. I mean, yes, they can do that. Historically, that has happened, but that is why we have discrimination laws. There's a similar thing here. And the question is, where should we draw the lines and what level of government intervention is necessary? We had a phenomenal attorney in one of our clubhouse rooms the other day discussing this and going extremely deep and obviously looking at things like Section 230. That's another thing that keeps getting thrown around. I've posted a couple great articles to my Instagram. If you're not following my Instagram, you should be. But I'm posting a lot of that stuff there. And the discussions that have taken place ultimately, yes, come down to, is Twitter going to get slapped or in trouble for this? Most likely not. They do have terms of service, but these terms of service are extremely subjective. We're forced to accept them, and they get to sit there and make the decision to ban a person whether they want to or not. There isn't a consistent, concrete set of guidelines for Twitter or for social media companies or Google or Apple or any of those for that fact. Again, that's separate. So let's just leave it at this. And the final factor is there are factors to consider when looking at Twitter's right to ban Trump. Things that we as a society should be talking about. You have to look at the size of the company, so the impact it has on society, the network effects, that's another important thing to Google and learn about, and the availability of other options. So if Twitter is the only platform that does what it does, which it essentially is, where you can have access to anybody, to tweet at them, to message them, and they can message the public, well, what other options are there for someone? And these are the things to consider. So Twitter's right. I believe they have the right. But do I think it was the right thing? Well, separate topic. Issue number 2, the morality and repercussions of banning versus not banning Trump. Not only did they ban him from Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but Shopify and Stripe, which is essentially like Visa, saying, no, you can't even use a payment processor, the number one payment processor anymore. So the question to ask about the morality issue is this the right thing? The question to ask is, does this decision actually make the world a better place? Because that's the goal, right? It's like we're making this decision to ban Donald Trump, assuming that this is what's going to make the world safer and better for all. So one of the repercussions is a question: will discussions that would have taken place openly on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook end up in encrypted, decentralized parts of the web if this continues? I think the answer to that is pretty obvious. It's already happening. People have already jumped to other apps. As of today, the number one app in the App Store in social media category, might even be overall, is Signal, an encrypted private messaging app that was like for really private black hat stuff, like that kind of shit, like a month ago when I last checked from friends. Like they were messaging, I'm like, what's Signal? So it wasn't for the average consumer. Now it is all of a sudden. Does this decision embolden his supporters and lead to more conflict? I also think the answer to that is obvious, but that is a point of discussion. One may take the side and say, it was the right thing to do. There will be a temporary, rising of emotions and it will blow over. I don't believe so. I believe that if you look at the facts, sweeping these people and their issues, 80 million or so people, under the rug and not listening to them and tearing out the voice that really was their sort of leader, if you will, like the leader of this movement has had his voice torn out and removed from the online world. I think it's pretty clear that that would absolutely embolden and make people even more emotional and lead to more conflict. And as of the day of recording, Tuesday, January 12th, this won't release until next week, the 18th, I believe. So between now and then, I'm sure some shit has gone down. And on the day this releases, you know, we're 2 days away from inauguration and potentially more chaos that they've been already preparing for. So the next piece of this is, does censoring him prevent further violence or make these views go away? Again, up to you to decide. But the reality is that we need objective standards to see that, you know, you have to look objectively at the protests that took place in 2020, particularly the ones by the BLM movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and the looting that took place, and the Capitol Hill riot. People don't want to look at that objectively. They immediately want to say that one was justified and one was not. But the only reason a person would say that is because they side with one of those. Like, there isn't, like, you're not actually being objective and rational if you're saying one of those is justified, the other one is not. Neither one of those is justified. It was not right to be violent in the streets and loot because George Floyd was killed, even though it was symbolic of all these black people being killed and persecuted and hurt by the police for decades. That's not a good enough, that there is no reason for violence, right? There's the right for peaceful protest, but there's absolutely no reason to allow, you know, setting police stations on fire. There's also absolutely no fucking reason to allow or to be okay with or to justify the Capitol being just destroyed and to walk in and take over and essentially like what looked like a coup taking place. It's not okay. It's not okay at all. 5 people died. Another guy committed suicide. One of the police officers committed suicide after the fact. Who knows why? I'll leave you with a quote on issue number 2. When you tear out a man's tongue, you are not proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say. Sit with that quote, rewind this if you have to, and hear it again, because I am telling you, the direction that we are going only emboldens all the people that support Trump, no matter you're with him or against him, you have to understand that. And that tearing out a man's tongue because you don't agree with what he has to say just proves that you fear what he might say. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work in a free country. It doesn't work in a country with freedom of speech. Issue number 3. Issue number 3 is quite simple. Has Trump actually broken any free speech laws? A lot of people keep talking about this. A lot of people keep pointing to the law as the reason that Twitter banned Trump. And then what you have is people saying, like, think about how confusing this is. People say things like, well, you know, Trump tweeted this, that, and the other over the last 4 years or right before the Capitol Hill riots. And then someone else says, Trump incited them at his speech that day and in the lead up to it, not online, but offline. And then you have another person say all these things. So let's look at something here. We should all, like issue number, like piece, you know, factor number 1 of issue number 3, has Trump broken any free speech laws? We should all read and study the First Amendment. That's step 1. Like, we shouldn't be talking about laws of this country if we haven't read and studied the First Amendment. Specifically, we should study laws on incitement. Incitement. Just Google that and you'll come across an article I also recently posted to Instagram. It is an extremely important and worthwhile read. Don't start yelling at people saying Trump did X, Y, and Z, or didn't do X, Y, and Z until you understand this. The people that keep saying he broke laws and incited violence, I'm sorry. As far as I can tell, that is absolutely incorrect. You need to go and learn that. As far as I can tell, incitement must be direct, specific, and immediate. Like, go do it now. So it would be something along the lines of, and forgive me, I don't even want to say stuff like this. It would be like, hey, you, listener, go kill John Doe right now. Like, specific, direct, you, and immediate now, or tomorrow, or whatever it might be. Otherwise, the reason for that law, by the way, if you look at the court cases that led to this decision, the reason for that is that if it is at all gray or unspecific or indirect or not immediate, well, then it's subjective in its interpretation. Each person could interpret it differently. And unfortunately, the reason the free speech line is so far out there, and fortunately, is because A, if it was any closer, if it was any more gray, a lot of people would be getting in trouble and individual people would be able to ban certain speech. And that's not going to work in a free society that values free speech and the First Amendment more than anything. It just isn't going to work. And so there's a reason that free speech is way out there. Also, you can't bring up hate speech in this conversation. To all the people bringing up hate speech, there is no specific, as far as I understand, that you could say that hate speech is like a part of free speech, but there isn't this like specific law around it. And in fact, there really can't be, because again, hate speech is extremely subjective. It's difficult to really create standards around. But the one thing we can create standards around are free speech. So the question to be asking is, what are the limitations on free speech? And if you want to have a discussion about it, the question is, should they be different or updated in any way? Like that's simple. Should the free speech laws be updated or different in any way? Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, should the government hold major corporations to constitutional free speech laws? So that's really an important part of all of this that I think people are saying. So Twitter didn't have to do that. The question is, should they have to do that? And the first question to ask is, ask yourself and ask others, is it okay for a handful of corporations to have an extreme amount, this much concentrated power? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, those social media companies, right? And then you've got Google as a search engine and as an app store, and Apple as an app store. You have a duopoly on the app store side between Apple and Google. So if you want to create an app, Google and Apple, these private businesses, get to decide whether you should be allowed to post it and distribute it or not. These two companies control the entire distribution of apps. Okay? So you have to ask yourself, is that level of concentrated power okay? So another follow-up question is this an effective monopoly? Like, when do you have an effective monopoly or a public square situation? And what this really inspires is a conversation around, we clearly have rights offline in the real world. So the question is, given how important the online world, the internet, social media has become into our lives, is it time, do we need a digital bill of rights? Like, should there be clear limitations on what you can and can't ban people for? Does it need to be standardized now? Because if it's not, Donald Trump and everybody with ideas like Donald Trump is going to be banned. Look at it this way. Would it be okay if Donald Trump or somebody like him and people like him owned and ran all these platforms that the whole world relied on, and one day began banning all socialist, fascist type ideas and voices? And then you didn't even realize that you were saying things that were socialist, but all of a sudden your page got turned off, your post got blocked, and you ultimately got banned. Would that be okay, given that life revolves around these few companies? I think the answer to that is as obvious as it gets. Of course it's not okay. The point of the government is to protect you, to ensure that the little guy has equal access, that there's a level playing field. So back to the Digital Bill of Rights and whether we need that or not, Poland, for one, just in December, I believe, passed a freedom of speech bill. And they are going to fine companies, I forget how much, I want to say 2.2 million US dollars, something close to that. They are going to fine social media companies every single time they ban a post that is constitutional. So what this is government intervention in a private business telling them, hey, you want to operate in our country? These are the rules. We have to protect our people. That's a decision that Poland made. And the question is, do we need something similar? I think we do. I think there's a couple ways to do it. You can slap, essentially, punish companies for breaking certain rules, or you can incentivize companies to take a different approach entirely. I'm bringing in a tangent issue from the side here, but give me a minute. One of the real issues here is the social media newsfeed on Instagram and Facebook. The day that newsfeed became personalized, that's when we saw this huge disparity and polarization of ideas, okay? That's when the polarization really began. See the movie, The Social Dilemma, which I have called one of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen. It's a documentary on Netflix, and it will really help you understand this. The point is, that newsfeed being personalized and an algorithm being in place really has made it difficult to understand what is what. And the real question here is perhaps, because from a first principles perspective, one could argue that perhaps that social media, that newsfeed, and that personalized algorithm is what has led to a lot of what we see today. So one solution, for example, and a discussion point could be, should we create some sort of incentive or punishment, like a tax, if companies are going to continue to use that? Because if they go back to a chronological feed, which would be much better for everybody, it wouldn't be better for Facebook and Instagram and these companies, because the point, the purpose, the reason for the algorithm, the reason for the personalization is to keep you addicted and spending time in the app seeing more ads. The more ads you see, the more ad revenue, the more revenue they get. The more advertisers like me and their companies spend money to get in front of people. So those are the types of questions. Those are the types of solutions. Those are the types of discussion points we should be having. And again, ask yourself, be consistent in your thinking. Always, every single time when you're thinking critically and you're stating an opinion, remember to view it from both sides. That's it. If you believe that it's okay to ban Donald Trump, would it be okay if Donald Trump banned you? Just because you said something that he didn't agree with. And again, you didn't break any free speech laws. If you look at the free speech laws, I didn't mention this, Donald Trump has not broken any. Is there a case that they might want to open something up against him and make it difficult for him and impeach him and all this kind of stuff? Yes. But as far as I can tell, he didn't actually break any laws. Did he do things? And again, you have to be careful as you're listening as well. Remember, this is where people are trapped in their thinking. I said these things, but I didn't say anything about what I feel is right or wrong. I didn't say anything about Donald Trump, right? And so one of the issues you see when you talk to people is just because I said Donald Trump didn't break any laws, people go, oh, so you mean? No, I don't mean anything. I don't mean anything. We have to stay in the facts and in a logical, rational state of mind as much as possible. If you ask the person their opinion, so ask me my opinion, Arman, so are you saying, if you said so blah, 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 I'd be like, no, chill out. I didn't say that. I think if I was president or in his position, first of all, I would lead with compassion. I would lead with enthusiasm, with charisma, and I would bring people together. I would never in a million years lead like Donald Trump. But that doesn't mean that just because I don't agree with how Donald Trump leads, that I should ban his voice. Does that make sense? Because that's dangerous. It's dangerous because when we do that in a democracy, when we do that in a free country, when we limit someone's speech, it's a slippery slope. As Naval Ravikant tweeted the other day, first they ban, accounts. Then they ban like individual people. Then they will ban the apps, already happening with Parler. After they ban the apps, then they will ban the websites, entire websites. And after they ban the websites, they will ban money, the financial industry, and control that. These are slippery slope steps toward a more authoritarian, totalitarian way of government and operating and controlling people. It is an exchange of security, right, for freedom. This is ultimately a question of a battle of the individual versus the collective. And people are stepping into this battle, and we need to think critically, deeply about this question. Is it better for the collective to have the power or the individual? Isn't there a reason why the individual and the states in America were given the power so that the big government didn't have power over them? I think so. So that was an example to make sure that when you're speaking to somebody and they go, "So you mean," you're able to calmly pause them and say, "Hey, you're not supposed to do that," and make sure to not do that yourself. Just because someone is stating a fact, their opinion on something is completely different. Last but not least, we need to talk about issue number 5. Issue number 5 is capitalism and the free market. People keep bringing up capitalism. People keep bringing up the fact that the free market is the reason we're here. Okay, first of all, as we know, and I know very well from being a progressive person for many years, the left loves government intervention. Historically, like that's just true. The left has constantly wanted the government to come in and tell us how to live in order to make it more equal and fair for everybody. Okay, no problem. But you cannot use the argument of whoops, capitalism, whoops, free market when Twitter decides to ban Trump. Because that's inconsistent. It's intellectually inconsistent. It's like, well, perhaps this is a time and a place for some regulation or intervention. So again, we said some of this, so I'll be very brief here. Is the market free when two companies, Apple and Google, control and distribute all apps? Ask yourself that question. Is it free when Amazon, AWS, Amazon Web Services, controls more than 70% of the internet infrastructure? Add in Microsoft and you basically have most of it. Now, something to think about is, do we want to live in a world where companies can subjectively decide on their own to shut off your access to communication, payment processing, electricity, your water, whatever? And you might say, Arman, that's extreme. Why would you say that? That's not what's happening. Because that's how it works. You start with one. That's what slippery slope means. In the last 3 days alone, it just started with one app, one platform, Facebook, and then it became more. It became Twitter, and then it became Shopify and his payment processing with Stripe. And then it became the PGA Tour saying, we don't even want you or your course. That one's whatever. The point is, it's a slippery slope. And then it became more people. It wasn't just Donald. Now it's Ron Paul. Now it's the walkaway campaign. Have you heard of the walkaway campaign? The walkaway campaign was a liberal guy who got tired of the Democratic Party and created a campaign on Facebook called the Walkaway Campaign to inspire people to walk away from the Democratic Party. Whatever. It's his choice. Gone. Banned. That's unbelievable. So, and that's not even an extreme movement of any kind, really. So these are the questions we have to ask ourselves. Can a competitive service to Twitter, say like a Parler, ever succeed in the current market? Can they ever succeed in the current market? And finally, is the function of government still to protect the little guy and provide level access to all, to protect natural rights, to enforce free markets? Like, is that the function of the government? Because if so, well, then that is a place where the government should step in. And perhaps we need, from issue number 4, should the government hold corporations to constitutional free speech laws, perhaps we need a digital bill of rights. These are the 5 issues. I'm sure there are many more, but to keep it simple and to take something that is extremely complex and bring it down to its most fundamental essence, I believe this is where we are today. Whew. With that said, I hope this was helpful. This is the framework that we need to be thinking in, and we can apply to anything for that matter. And I trust and hope and stay optimistic that we can get through this. Please share this with people. The absolute, people often say, Arman, what can I do? How can I help you? Thank you for this. Thank you for that. The number one thing you can do is share my content. Like, it all starts there, right? It might lead to some other good thing for me that's helpful, but it all starts with content. Share my content, share this video, share the audio of the podcast, share my, Instagram, whatever it might be. I really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and subscribe now on YouTube, where we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff. Thank you. I appreciate you. I will stay optimistic. It's getting hard, but I will. We have to learn how to think critically. Much love. Peace.